Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and our guest today is Kathy Urffer. Kathy is our Vermont River Steward for the Connecticut River Conservancy, which collaborates with partners across 4 states to educate and bring people together to understand the many ways we can protect our rivers. Kathy studied acting, art, psychology, and natural resource management, and she's going to tell us a little bit about all of those things today. Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yes, you are turquoise today.
Yeah.
You are our turquoise guest. So, Kathy, you, as a child, you moved around a bit in your early years. Your dad it wasn't Army, what was it?
He worked civil service for the Army.
Got
so
it.
he wasn't Army enlisted, but he was essentially doing support communications work on near adjacent to Army bases. So.
Yeah. And you started off you were born in Germany?
Yeah.
Yep, and then Arizona, and then New Jersey, right? So you were beachfront New Jersey for a while growing up. Did you spend a lot of time there? The ocean?
Yeah, my dad loved to fish. My mom was from New Jersey. My dad was from Philadelphia. But when he, before civil service for the Army, he actually was in the Coast Guard, and he was stationed in Point Pleasant, New Jersey.
Oh.
And so that's where we moved back to when I was 11, and I lived there through high school.
Were you interested in theater? I think that was your...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I participated in plays, in my high school plays.
Yeah.
And then even younger than that, I took like dance classes. I'm an extrovert, so I think, I was the type of person who would put on shows for my parents,
Right.
So, yeah.
And you were one of 4 siblings, right?
Yeah.
So you had somewhat of an audience, too.
Yeah, I was the youngest, so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Did that carry over when you went to college, studying theater?
Yeah, I went to Rutgers, which is a state university of New Jersey, so lots of choices. And I, you have a little bit of time before you have to declare your major. So they actually have an arts program, and so I was considering getting a BFA or a BA in theater, and then I decided I should be more practical than that, and I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in psychology. But because I was in proximity to what was a professional program at Rutgers, I got to see a lot of really great theater.
The psychology piece, right? You were interested in studying the human condition.
So I just sort of gravitated to the content of wanting to understand how people think, and the human condition. After college, floundering, what do I do? And was doing all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
And then made a decision to go to New York to go through a professional acting training program.
And you did that for quite a few years.
Yeah, it was a 2-year program. And then I added on some additional casting classes and things like that in the 3rd year. Yeah. The training program I went through was Meisner styled, Sanford Meisner. And so even as a little girl, I remember, I probably had to be 12 or 13, and I came across An Actor Prepares by Stanislavski, right? So it's like, when you think of the history of theater and the styles, right? There was a point when Stanislavski introduced this idea of realism, really, not dramatic, but real.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that book when I was 12 or whatever, and just being enthralled by this idea of presenting real life and having, the challenge of, plays and the narrative and telling the story with the real emotional response. So the Meisner method is one of the grandchildren, I guess, of Stanislavski's method. And there's different, in the city there's different, kind of classical training programs, all with a pretty deep connection to psychology and psychological health, right? So I chose one that purposefully did not have you explore your own trauma to get to an emotional reaction. It was more creating, the way you do when when you tell a story and you can empathize and feel along with it, sort of creating pretend scenarios,
yes,
right, to cause
yes,
an emotional response or to like enliven the character or something like that. As a 20-something-year-old, as we do when we're 20, I had a lot of strong opinions and concerns about the world and how things were developing and stuff like that. I started developing performance art pieces that were often a commentary either on feminist issues or social justice issues or, even just explorations of like art and space and perception sometimes.
Yeah.
So a lot of different kinds of things. And I had a lot of friends that were artists and theater people. So there was a lot of, kind of collaboration and collective ideation of like things to do.
It sounds like fun.
It was fun.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
It sounds great. And you were working with other people and then performing together, right?
Yeah, most of the performance pieces I did actually were by myself. But then there were other collective, events.
Yeah.
Protest puppetry, all kinds of different things like that.
You were starting to get more into the natural world, which is sort of a big part of your background as well, and working for the Smithsonian Native American Museum in New York, volunteering in the Parks Department as well.
Yeah, I volunteered at the Native American Museum and volunteered in the Parks Department. And that was really after I went through the professional acting training program, sort of came out the other side, and realized I didn't necessarily want to follow that career choice. I was kind of left like, now here I am in New York City. What am I going to do now with my life? Fortunately, and I was waitressing as one does when you're an acting person in New York. And I was actually making really good money waitressing. Yeah. So I had a lot of time. I mean, I only worked 3 days a week, made plenty on those 3 days. So I had an opportunity to really take the time to start to volunteer.
Yeah.
For those organizations, and then also do nature hikes in the city and all kinds of different things like that. So as I was trying to figure out like what my next steps would be in terms of a career or creating the grown-up life.
You were leaning that direction, and along the way I know that you call yourself an amateur botanist and herbalist, which only means you don't get paid for it, right? But I would assume you have a pretty wide knowledge of those things.
I think it's one of those things you have to practice so you forget. I mean, so there was a point in my 20s when I started going on nature walks and learning the plants, and I had a very good friend that we would do this together, and it got to the point where we would go on these walks and we would quiz each other on the Latin names of different plants, and then you start to realize like what is native and what isn't native, what's invasive, and you start to see the greens differently, right? It's not like all green. It's like here's gray green, here's yellow green, so I think your perception of the world gets more granular. And then the obvious next step after learning plants is, well, where did this plant come from, and what was it used, and how is it used? And then that just unfolds into like learning about botany and herbalism and.
Yeah, and so you did a lot of research on your own?
Yep.
To edify your own knowledge.
Yeah, a lot of picking and tasting things and being like, bitter,
Right. Well, also training your eye, because once you can recognize something, then you start seeing it everywhere. And I think that's what's so great about getting kids outside young and early.
I moved to Vermont in 2004, so it was really like, I worked at Hackensack Riverkeeper, I think 2000 to 2003, 2004, right before I moved. So I started that job at Hackensack Riverkeeper sort of at the end of my time in New York City, and did a reverse commute from the city into New Jersey to work.
Yeah. And was it something that you wanted to continue? Was there something about that job that you really liked?
I loved it, yes, absolutely.
So
when what I realized was I had been living in New York for 10 years and sort of started to just get to the age where I was examining, being more intentional about where I wanted to live and how the rest of my life might unfold. And really started to understand I didn't want to live in New York City or the metropolitan area. And I loved that job. That organization, Hackensack Riverkeeper, is part of the Waterkeeper Alliance, which now has, I think, over 300 waterkeeper programs internationally. So because of that relationship, I was able to meet and know all kinds of other waterkeepers through the country. And so left, started looking for what other opportunities there might be to do that work, but just not do it in the New York City area.
And here's a little known fact, that you were very close friends with Tim Wessel. From a young age. Tim Wessel, who was on our select board, who actually I had on the last show, not knowing that he and Kathy were old friends, which was kind of an interesting coincidence.
We met at Rutgers because Tim went to Rutgers as well. So
yes, and he had a lot to do with getting you to come up to Brattleboro.
Right. He, my best friend, and Tim were married for years, and so they moved up together, built a house off the grid, 2 houses actually off the grid. During the time I was living in New York, and so I would come up every 2 or 3 months to visit, hop on the bus, get out of the city, come up and then spend time with them for the weekend. Then head back to the city. And the other piece about that, interestingly, is the New England Youth Theater started kind of right around that same time, and their son participated in the New England Youth Theater. And having been steeped in this, New York City acting world, to be able to come up here and actually go to see the New England Youth Theater shows reminded me that it was fun. I literally was like, oh, right, this is why it's play,
Oh, that's so
play.
Great.
So I have to say, New England Youth Theater definitely breathed a little bit of fresh air into my perception, after deciding the acting world wasn't for me.
You also kind of discovered Antioch College being right across the river, speaking of rivers.
Yeah.
And deciding to go back and get a master's.
Right.
Yeah.
So in my thoughts about leaving New York City, I was single, and so, I was go look for a job somewhere else and relocate, or go get a master's degree. So I started looking at potential colleges. And as I was spending time coming up to Vermont, my friend Eileen, I think, actually got one of Tom Wessel's books for me, Reading the Forested Landscape, which I read in my little apartment in Brooklyn, and was like, so it's one thing you've noticed and learned all the plants, but it sort of took it to this next level of actually being able to see the full environs and understand, you could understand the history of the place from that. So I don't remember at what point that I was coming up, and I was learned about Antioch, and then learned he was faculty there, and I thought, oh my goodness, hello, yes.
That must have been amazing to realize that.
So it was an interesting kind of I don't know, synchronicity, or it was another thing kind of in what's the state, a feather in Vermont's cap, to be oh, and that too, why not?
Yeah. And his book was really groundbreaking for the time. I can't remember what year it came out, but it was early 2000s, I think, when it came out, and it was illustrated beautifully. I think by Brian Cohen. I'm not sure now. So you get a master's in natural resource management. Somewhere along the way, also, you were a fellow at Vermont Leadership Institute. Which I personally had never heard of. Yeah, and so it's the Snelling Center for Government. And can you talk a little bit about that? What does it mean to be a fellow?
It's essentially a leadership program that's year-long. And the way it's structured, so the Snelling Center is named after Governor Snelling.
Right.
And it's been managed by his children and family. And so the Leadership Institute is structured in a way where you have to apply. They take, a cohort of, I forget how many, maybe 15 to 20 is in our group. And I did that program in 2014. And so it's a year-long program, and each month there's a retreat at a different place in the state. Or I think they still do it this way, but so you'll go for, all day Saturday, Sunday, and some days it was 3 days. And so you are simultaneously getting to actually visit different areas of Vermont, and also each weekend is focused on a different state issue, right, where you do a deep dive. So one weekend was in Montpelier. We visit the legislature, we meet with legislators. You're learning about the bills in that year that are being passed and the process, right, all of that. Another session, may have been focused more on personal awareness, like we did our Myers-Briggs, and finding ways to process through, problems together with other people and things like that. So it was a really good program because there was a bunch of different tools to engage, right? Community discussion, leadership, and also being able to see the state, and also digging into state issues at that time. So we visited the Springfield prison, spent some time in Bennington in an arts community, and looked at things at the Vermont Arts Exchange, I think, in North Bennington. So it was a really nice way to sort of like deep dive into different issues around the state.
Yes, it sounds really interesting. What you're doing for Connecticut River Conservancy is similar in a lot of ways. I bet you got a lot of tools during that.
I got my master's degree in 2009-ish. I did the Leadership Institute in 2014, and so those two things actually set me up really well for taking this job in 2017. And it did give me really good perspective on the state issues, and also the weekend in Montpelier was one of the ones where I was like, oh, I love this, really. Nice. So there's a big aspect of my job that is focused on policy development, commenting on permits and stuff like that.
It's interesting, isn't it? When we're young, we kind of have the luxury sort of going from one thing to another, and sometimes when you get to a certain age, you look back and you think, oh yeah, there's a thread there.
Definitely.
Unbeknownst to us, perhaps. Connecticut River Conservancy. So you, I believe, took over for David Dean when he retired from there, and he was there for many years and did tremendous work as well. Can you give us a little capsule picture of what the Conservancy does?
The Conservancy has been around for almost 70 years. It was formed in 1952. So, before the Clean Water Act was passed. And when you talk to old timers in the area, they still, they can remember the Connecticut River running with raw sewage, and never would have gone in it, still are wary. And so the organization was founded on, really to clean up the river, to try to figure out how to clean up the river. And it's changed shape over the many years. It's really been a long time. So where we're at now, we're basically the advocacy organization to protect the river, including the entire watershed. So it's really not just about the Connecticut River, right? Anything that affects a river is coming from the land surrounding it. So it's really the whole watershed.
That's a huge area.
But
you're talking about all the rivers that are flowing into the Connecticut.
Until September, I was doing Vermont and New Hampshire. And it's not one section, it's all over. It's like, if you think the eastern half of Vermont, and at that time it was essentially the western half of New Hampshire. We hired a river steward for New Hampshire in September. Who's great, and really nice to have like a partner across the river that we can work on things together.
So you are doing the whole state.
Wow.
That's a big job.
And I have colleagues, and we have other parts of the organization. My job encompasses, as I said, the policy stuff, some restoration management, a lot of community engagement work and education. So I get to wear a lot of different hats. And then we also have, I have other staff that support work in all 4 states. So we have an ecology planner who is helping to do some community science work, looking at fish migration in some of the tributaries. We have a restoration director that manages our budget and multiple restoration projects across all 4 states. And this is where we work directly with landowners to do a project on their land. So it might be something like working with farmers where we install essentially a forested or area along the river, right? Plant trees along the rivers, or it might be taking unused dams out, things like that.
Right.
So it's a big body of work in terms of
it's a big
what we
body of
do.
water. It's a big body of work. So much of what you are doing, and I think a lot of things that you've done is about our relationship to the world and this myth of separation that we have. And you can certainly see that with rivers that flow into the big Connecticut River, and how also the Connecticut River has cleaned up so incredibly over the course of these years. And it's a pretty short period of time that that's turned around.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's only now, like when I was working at Hackensack Riverkeeper, I was much younger, you know, and I at that point I wasn't really cognizant of how short of a period of time it had been since the Clean Water Act. Like, it didn't occur to me this was kind of new work. And where we are now, it's still pretty new, you know, but I have like a larger vantage point to understand how quickly our rivers and our natural areas can heal themselves if given the chance, right?
Yeah,
so.
I know, that's so heartening to know that, and to have someone in your position to actually be able to be seeing it and kind of report back to us, you know, to let us know that this is so possible, and we each have power in that game.
Yeah.
Kathy, you talked a little bit about how healing has been kind of a central focus for you in your life. I think starting way back when you were a kid, and you know, going through your story here, and healing the river as well. Could you talk a little bit about that as a central focus for you? Yeah,
I think you know, I think when we were talking, you said, you know, there's like acting and there's psychology and now there's environmental work and they're so different. And I said, no, they're not. In my mind, they're pretty much the same thing, which is centered on this idea of healing. I think even when I was acting, I was really thinking about the human condition and how you know, how theater and storytelling can have an effect on people reflecting on their life or maybe making different choices. I never thought about theater from the vantage point of entertainment. Like, I always thought about it from the vantage point of like sort of ritual, I guess. And, you know, psychology is sort of an obvious connection to healing. But, you know, I think as my life trajectory with learning about plants and experiencing the environment and all of the things I've learned, you know, it really has taken me to this place where this idea of, you know, it's the idea of a way, right? We can throw our garbage away and it goes somewhere, and it doesn't, right? And this idea of a difference between ourselves as humans and other living things, like that there's some difference, and there's really not, you know, like we are in relationship with all the other living things on the planet.
All the time.
And the non-living things.
Right.
And even, you know, when I was at Antioch, we were learning about, I had one class where we were learning about, you know, the earth writ large, right? The spinning of the globe, and it's spinning around the sun. And then there's the gravitational pressure, right? And there was some point at which I started to realize, like, you know, we think of the earth as a solid ball, right? That's just kind of spinning, but it squeezes and it has these cycles. And it occurred to me that the earth itself, it's almost like it breathes. Right? And when you start to see like how the water on the globe moves and how the weather on the globe moves, it is a pulsing, living, like breathing rock, you know, that's kind of spinning around the sun. And, you know, it just further clarified for me, you know, like this idea of life and the essence of life and our experience here on our little bit blue planet, you know.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful image. It's a beautiful image of the earth breathing as it moves.
Yeah, and I even think of my own, you know, I have 2 young kids, so I do a lot of like like I've done over the past several years, a lot of actual intentional like breathing to try to like calm myself down. And it's, to me, it's like, you know, when I think of rivers, I really think of veins and arteries. Like I think of things now much more in this framework of our living body, right? And feel much less separation between, you know, the tree and me. Like, you know, I'm really aware of the fact that like I'm breathing and the tree is breathing and we're breathing together, right? And that we are in relation to the world that way, you know?
You're breaking that myth of separation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by experience, but that's the thing, it's experiential.
Yeah, and I really think that myth of separation is in some ways the dis-ease, right? Like these are the things that have allowed us to make the decisions that are destructive, you know? The idea that you can put your waste stream in a river. I think that's okay somehow.
Yeah, and you know, we have so many people in this area, I think, who are focused on bringing these things together. You know, Melanie Kahn with mycology, you know, and mushrooms and foraging and all that. And Tom Wessel, you know, who is doing what he's doing. They're Annette Spaulding with scuba diving, you know, and finding the petroglyphs. I mean, there are so many people who are saying, you know, look at this, you know, and I just think we're so fortunate in this area to have so many folks who are doing the real work of helping to bring us together.
You know, it's so funny. You're making me think. Yesterday, I went from my office downtown. I walked down Main Street, 9 a.m. to go grab a water sample, river sample, off the bridge. But I noticed along the way there was a mayfly. I don't know exactly which aquatic insect. Unfortunately, it was mayfly or there were caddisflies or something. But there was a hatch the night before. And so all of the storefronts, wherever there was kind of a light, they must have hatched out after dark, and there were all of these aquatic insects, you know, attached to the windows.
To the windows?
Was Main Street.
Wow.
And I was walking along, like, looking at all of them. I mean, there were thousands, you know, which I was like, unfortunately, that you ended up here instead of in the river where you would have fed a fish, right? But people are walking by, no one's noticing. And I was sort of like, you know, how can you not see this amazing thing that probably literally only happens that one day, right? Like it was the exact right day for those creatures to hatch.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to tell, I went into Brown and Roberts to get someone, and the woman behind the counter, I was like, come outside and look. I had to tell someone because I was like, there's this like kind of this miracle that occurred that, you know,
right here on Main Street.
Right here on Main Street.
Right here on Main Street, right next to the river where we all live. Kathy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a great story to end on, too. It's really beautiful. Yeah. So keep up the good work. We'll be seeing what you're doing. We'll be hearing about all of the different things. You've got a Riverfest coming up pretty soon. Yeah,
so this will be the second year. We've done this in Brattleboro. Actually, it's going to be at Norms, so it's kind of across the river. But on July 30th, we're hosting the New England Paddle Sport Championship. So there'll be some competitive racers out in the river in the morning. You can watch and cheer them on. And then the afternoon, with the help of the Brattleboro Reformer, who's one of our sponsors, we're going to have a whole, you know, DJ music, beer and food trucks, things for the kids, other environmental groups, some guided trips. So we'll have some pontoon boats and a canoe and kayak.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. That's great. And it's Norms in Keene, is it?
Norms in Hinsdale. So
Norms in Hinsdale.
Got it. You know, right across the river.
Right across the river.
Across from Whetstone.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks to all of you for being with us today and with Kathy Urffer, and to hear all these fabulous stories. Her last story there, keep in mind, keep your eyes open when you're walking down Main Street or going past the river, where the Whetstone comes into the river, where the West River comes into the Connecticut. Keep your eyes open and tune in next time. We will have another person from the town to come on and talk about who they are and what they're doing. See you next time.